So now we're going to take a look at float, and I'm almost ready to stop teaching float, but maybe you still need to know it because you'll come across it in the wild. So I'm going to introduce you to it, so you see somebody else's code, and it could occasionally be good for wrapping text around an image, so that's kind of nice. But the reason float came into existence was to do just that, to sort of like wrap text around an image. And then people, because there weren't a lot of good tools for doing layout with HTML and CSS and positioning elements, people started to use float to do layout. But float has like some weird things that you got to work with. So we'll just kind of go through these examples and take a look at it, and we'll just open it up first and see what it looks like. And so there we have images and text wrapping around them. So that's kind of cool, right? And if we go look at that code, our main CSS, I need a chair because it's been a long day. So we have float left and float right, and that's being applied to the image, right? So here's the one that's right, and so that image is floated over to the right, and then there's one that's on the left down there. Further down, go through all that text. There's the image that's being floated to the left. And then around the div in the image, we just have a border and a margin. So that's floating text around an image. You just say float left, float right. And then there's this issue, so let's look at this. Whoops. Because float takes things out of the document flow. If that wasn't out of the document flow, then it wouldn't be overflowing. And maybe the next example, fixes it. But let's just modify this one a little bit. So this is number 2. And what if we had another div down here, but without an image in it, just some text. And boom. Oh, get rid of that too. I'll go back to our page and refresh it. It's like, huh, right? Like that's floating on top of everything, right? But it's a weird kind of a deal because it doesn't just float on top of everything. It like starts floating where it is in the document flow, and then the things beneath it, right, are floating. If we added more of those in there, right, it doesn't just start floating and go up to the very top, right? If it floated and nothing blocked it, it'd float straight to the top. But it started floating right here and stopped. That's right where it started in that element. It didn't float over that. But things after it, it's like floating on top of them. And text wraps around it, which is weird, right? Like float's just weird, you know? It's like, it's weird. It doesn't have consistency, right? So like it's floating, but it doesn't float all the way to the top. It's only things after it that float under it. It doesn't float over and have everything above it underneath it, right, on the page. And then, but the text doesn't float under it, you know? Like the text wraps around it. So these are just intricacies and nuances of float. I'm going to get these back out of here because this is an example that is in the course at Greater Commons. If you want to take this whole course, it's all right here at Greater Commons. And yeah, all the code, all the videos, everything. And if you can't afford access, message me on Twitter, and I'll get you discounted access or free access. And so how do we fix that overflow deal? Right, there's that overflow right there. How do we fix that? Well, we've got some code here that we put on, and we say overflow auto. Right, so automatically watch for overflow and don't let it happen. And so if we put that on our code, and we'll go to the third one here. Cool, it didn't overflow. But it's just kind of stupid, right? I'm sorry, I'm berating float. I'm not a fan of it. But that's float. Intricacies and nuances. So the main takeaways that you should know float right now is, you know, these images got float left and float right. And then they're in a container, but they'll just float right over the bottom of that container if the container's not big enough for them. So if you're going to float an image in a container, you want it to stay in that container, you want text to wrap around it, cool, float left or float right, and then text is going to wrap around it, and then do overflow auto, so it doesn't overflow the container. So why don't you all try building a container with some text and putting an image in it with the text in the container and the image in the container and floating something left and right. Do you want this as a homework assignment? It's probably a good idea. Okay? Do that one. I'll make up some position homework assignments too. All right, go do the float.